Have you heard of the Dark Triad Personality disorder? Some have suggested that this may be a new type of personality. Thank you so much for joining me today on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and a narcissistic abuse survivor. In this episode, we're going to take a close look up at the makeup of this individual and why they pose such great risk to us all. We'll also discuss what ambiguous grief is and how it's so important for us to process all kinds of losses, even the loss of a toxic relationship. I'm thrilled you're here with me today. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss future episodes, and leave a review and let me know what you think of the show. Finally, thank you so much for your donations to this listener-supported podcast, because together you and I are shedding light on all things related to abuse. So with that, let's listen in to this replay of a TikTok Live. There was a great TikTok about a person who described being a paramedic and visiting a crime scene where there had been young children who had been murdered at this crime scene. It's gone very viral. It's a huge video when she describes her reaction to being on this crime scene as an EMT for a period of time and the thoughts that went through her head and the confusion she had about who could do this? Why would someone do this to children? Why would someone hurt other people in general? And the detective she'd been hanging out with said to her near the end of the day is, when you start to understand how someone can do this, then you need to stop doing this. It isn't about understanding. That's not what we need to be focusing. Understanding doesn't solve anything. And it got me thinking. It got me thinking about the problems that we make, the errors that we make when we try to understand narcissism, narcissists, sociopaths, and other toxic people. The brain is wired from the beginning to learn. In fact, you probably think that your primary goal in life is to be safe. Your primary goal is to be safe. That we're all hardwired to do that. You think that you're hardwired looking for pleasure, and you're all about having the best life that you can be and having benefits and all of these type of things. You think that's what your life is about. It isn't. What you're really about is actually survival. That self-preservation is what we're about. You want to live and see tomorrow. So everything that we do is all about preservation of self. So one of the things that our brain's super good at is it tries to make sense of what's happening and why it happens so that it doesn't happen again. It's very self-protective. So say, for example, that you lived in a village that was prowled by a jaguar or a leopard or something very, very dangerous. The village would become very good at identifying risk factors about that animal. They would know that it comes out a certain time of the day, it makes certain sounds. They would have all this protective measures. They would learn the habits of that predator and then take these protective measures in order to keep safe. Now imagine that you moved. Say that you moved continents and you went to a new continent and it was prowled by a different kind of a cat, another big cat, but not the type of cat you're familiar with. But you made the assumption that the rules that were typical for the animal that you had lived around before applied to the rules to this new animal, but it actually doesn't. So that's one of the errors that we make, is that we assume, based upon our life history, that what we know about people, dangerous people, bad situations, that we can apply that to every person that we meet, and we can't. We can't. The other error that we make is that we assume that they're like us, that again, that's back to this cause and effect, this trial and error thing that we do. We assume that they think like us, follow the same principles that we do, and as a result, we can then predict their behavior based on those assumptions. And one of the assumptions we make is that there's some things that are too horrific or out of bounds, and that normal people don't do those things. The problem is when you're dealing with someone who is conscienceless, lacks a conscience, there is nothing that they won't do that's outside their limits. Anything to them that's self-preservating, that preserves themselves, they're willing to risk. And as a result, your prediction of them behaving within these normal societal guidelines is going to lead you in the wrong direction. Here's another problem. Here's a last problem that we have, and that is we think, and this is a big one. This is what happens with all survivors of abuse, at least a lot of us. This is because it's one of the most common questions I'm asked, either in my consultations or I'm asked when I go live. But one of the common questions people want to know is, how can someone do this to me? We think that understanding their intentionality will somehow make a difference and change things, protect us. Maybe we can have a better course of action. We somehow think that gives us control or gives us a handle on it. The reality is it actually doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter why someone does whatever they do. What matters is what you're going to do to take care of yourself. So we spend all this time and effort as if we can somehow lock the magic of the universe, make this person become different, or somehow put something in place that's going to have a different outcome, as if it's going to take care of the situation, partly because I think we don't want to make the change because it's too large and difficult and catastrophic, partly because we know our partner, whoever we're in a relationship with, or maybe family member, is highly toxic, is going to make things super, super hard, and we don't want that consequence, but also because it gives you the false sense of safety and predictability when really there isn't any, and it ultimately actually doesn't matter. So we spend a lot of time and effort on trying to make sense of things when it really doesn't help us. And actually, I think it gets in the way of things. Here's the hard part that I had to learn. I think it's hard for us to learn. I think we're taught from the sandbox. Share, be nice to so-and-so. That's what people do. I think of the book that Dr. Seuss wrote, Everything I Needed to Learn in Life, I Learned in Kindergarten. If we live by the rules of kindergarten, which I would want my neighbors and people that are in my life to live by those rules. Those would be very reasonable thing. But the problem is when we live by those rules with people who are not living by those rules, then we end up in trouble. We end up making assumptions that we shouldn't make, that are toxic or actually dangerous. So it comes back to, instead of living rules, being a nice person. Back to this nice person. Oh, I thank you for saying that, Goddess. He didn't write that book. There's a book. I know that he wrote a book about, I'm trying to think, Oh, the Places You Will Go. That's what I'm thinking. Oh, the Places You Will Go. That's what I'm thinking of. But it comes back to, how do we think in a self-protective way, with an assumption of looking out for ourselves, but also in a way that's reasonable, kind, and makes us easy to live with other people. So that's sort of the challenge that we are in, is that we need to handle things from the standpoint of, is this my betterment or not my betterment? At the same time, we want to live well with other people. Now, we don't want to be predatory like they're predatory and assume everybody is dangerous, but we also don't want to miss the fact that there are people, a certain number of people, maybe around 10% of the people we meet, 10 to 30% of the people we meet, probably aren't the healthiest and probably are pretty self-serving. I think that's the piece that I'm really learning, is how to then move into situations and where we meet our own needs. We look at it proactively. Let's talk about the Dark Triad Personality. What the hell is that? How does that relate to narcissism and psychopathy? The Dark Triad Personality is a new group. They're not for sure if they're distinct and separate from antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, but they seem to be a combination of both. They have the qualities of 3 different types of characteristics. They're narcissistic, which means they're entitled, think they're special, that life is about them and should be taken care of. They're competitive, they're envious. They also have antisocial personality traits, and that means that they don't mind breaking the rules. They have, both types have no empathy, and they don't follow the rules breakers massively. Deceptive, and everything is about what they want. They're very predatory that way. And then there's a third one, and I probably won't say this correctly, but it's a Machiavellian. I think I said that right. Machiavellian style of personality. And I know it's not a DSM-5. It's coming out of a book about this type. It was about a prince, actually, who is very, very evil. And this type of personality is highly slick and deceptive. They're the snake or the siren. They're going to butter you up in order to take you out and take you down. They're very predatory and sneaky and charming. So all the things that you think about is someone who sort of like takes advantage of people, like blackmails or leverage, or get information on people and then use it against them. So the Dark Triad is the makeup of all three of those personality styles. Very dangerous group, very ruthless group, not anybody that you would want to encounter in. But like I said, the research is still out. There are people looking at this combination to see, is it really actually a separate syndrome? Or is it part of, like, two of you on both TikTok and Instagram said this together? Or are we actually describing a covert/vulnerable narcissist? Is that really what that is? Here's how I see the difference. To me, a vulnerable or covert narcissist, which is the same thing, by the way. So if you hear someone talking about a vulnerable narcissist or somebody else talking about covert narcissist, we're really talking about the same thing. Covert or vulnerable narcissist is really a person who doesn't have the adoration and attention they think they deserve. They don't have the life that they think they ought to have. Whereas most narcissists they're not happy either, but they at least look like, they're like, I'm the best at this, and I did this, and I sold this, and I have this new car. That is sort of the typical grandiose narcissist, is the bigger than life kind of a person. Whereas a covert narcissist tends to be the one that it doesn't work well. Like, they didn't get the job they think they deserve, and they aren't getting paid what they think they're owed. Their family doesn't appreciate them the way that they should. So when you meet them, you hear this record of failure and this record of problems. And the problem we have with that is when we hear somebody talking about stuff like that, we assume sensitivity. We assume that this is a reflective person who's processing why things hasn't turned out the way that they wanted it to. And then we mistakenly think they have empathy for us. And then when things go wrong for us, that they'll be similarly supportive of us, just like they want us to support them. Problem is, they don't show up and support us. It's always the next drama and the next drama and the next drama. They're always the victim. They're never not the victim. So they just want you to then, instead of give them all this adoration and praise like the grandiose narcissist, they want all your sympathy and support. But it's still supply. That's still the point. It's still supply. So that's the covert narcissist. And they also tend to do more subtle things. They're more passive aggressive. They're more likely to make snarky jokes at your risk. They're more likely to sabotage things that are super important to you in your life. They're more likely to get around you in sort of a subtle way that you can't come out and call them on it. Whereas a grandiose narcissist is more likely just to overtly overlook you, step on your toes, put you down, those types of things. They're just more likely to do it. Now, the Dark Triad is different from both of those. The Dark Triad is strategically planning how to manipulate you and use you. It's a con. They get into the relationship to take advantage of you purposefully. They're not the victim. If they're playing the victim role, because it serves some greater plot. They're actually seeing like 5 chess moves down, and this is part of that strategy. So imagine that we're in court. We're back in England at 1400s or something, and we're all there based on the king's approval and based upon how happy we keep them, and we're going to be making moves in order to make it work in our best advantage. If you watch Game of Thrones, you see this all the time. You see how the lords and ladies are doing all these strategies, or even like right now, I've been watching the latest one about the House of Dragons, and the moves that are happening between Alicent and, I'm blocking on the daughter's name, the one who's supposed to be queen. You can see the way that they're working at each other to keep ahead. See, that's more of a dark, I'm not saying they're a Dark Triad personality, but that strategy, that sort of intrigue is what you would see with a Dark Triad personality. If you want to really get a up close look at personality styles, watching Game of Thrones is awesome. It is. I mean, they do a really good job of making kind of like pure representations of darkness. And like the one, I don't know if you saw this week's, but the queen asked for something to happen. Her father was the Hand, and I'm sorry for those of you who are not watching. Her father had a very, very powerful position and lost the position. And she met somebody else, said, would you like to have him have that position back? She didn't know she just met somebody with a Dark Triad personality. She thought that this guy was going to do some kind of like normal kind of strategy to get her dad back. No, he kills the current Hand. He kills them. And she's like, I didn't ask for that. But now she's implicated because she asked for her dad to be back in place. So that's a great example of a dark triad personality move. See, he compromised her, and he also got his way, and he took out a very powerful opponent. So that think of the intrigue. When you think of a dark triad personality, which is a mix, again, for those who are just joining me, a mix of Machiavellian personality style, which is very deceptive, very sly, very slimy, with a narcissist, with a antisocial personality disorder. So you've got someone who's without a conscience, who thinks everything needs to be their way and done that they are above the rules and that it's about them, and they're willing to do whatever it takes in a very sly way to get there. That's a dark triad personality. I don't know what percentage of the world is that. That would be interesting to know. Are we talking like 2%, 3%? I don't know. I don't think there are a lot of them, but man, you don't want to meet one. You don't want to meet one. And of course, they're going to be attracted to power. So, I'm sure when it talks to lobbyists, when you're in Washington, D.C. or whatever, I'm sure there's a lot of that personality that's in that. Are you at risk of being targeted by a dangerous man? What type of women do narcissist and psychopath males seek out? And what can all of us do to protect ourselves so that we're less at risk of being abused by these toxic people? If these questions intrigue you and you'd love to know the answers, then please join me for an upcoming interview on November 10th. I'm going to be meeting with researcher, author Sandra L. Brown. She has spent her lifetime working and researching dangerous types of men. Let's find out how we can reduce our exposure and what we can do to begin to protect ourselves better by identifying the risk factors. Get your tickets through the link in the show notes, and no worry if you can't make it the night of the event, because all ticket holders will receive a complimentary replay after the event concludes. This is a webinar you don't want to miss. Can you talk about how to stop ruminating? Describe rumination, because I'll tell you what confuses me. Rumination actually is an anxious symptom. So when you ruminate on something, it's to say that you're like in your head, will I pass that test? Will I pass that test? What if I don't pass that test? It's going to be catastrophic. I better pass that test. Do you think I'm going to pass that test? That's rumination. So when I hear it, the psychologist in me thinks, oh, that has to do with anxiety. But when we're talking about it in the context of abuse, how does it show up? And maybe you're not. Maybe you are talking about anxiety. But can you say more? Is it not going back and forth on missing them and hating them at the same time? That's actually cognitive dissonance. It's can you use the word rumination? It's a clinical word that has to do with anxiety. So that's why whenever I hear it, I get totally confused about it. But the back and forthness that you're talking about, the duality, the both loving and loathing them, missing them, and can't stand to be with them, that's called cognitive dissonance. That's when you are in both states at the same time and you can't resolve what's real. You don't know whether this person's a good person or bad person. You don't know if this is a good relationship or bad relationship. So you stay stuck in this agonizing confusion, this mental fog, this confusion about what is it, this is what my course is going to be addressing, the first steps to leaving a narcissist. We're going to talk about what is that? How do you stop that process so that you can then know what's real? Because what we're trying to do is figure out what's true so that you can know what's real and then make a decision as a result of that. Cognitive dissonance, when we talk about it in normal situations, is just the challenge between two different decisions. Like, say today for lunch, I know what I'm going to have for dinner. I know I need to be careful about how much fat I have for lunch, but somebody brings in a donut, it's going to blow my fat count. So, because I watch macros, and so I think, should I or shouldn't I? That's cognitive dissonance in a normal situation. It's a mental process where you feel this tension around it. But when it comes to abuse, cognitive dissonance is the inability to know who we're in a relationship with, and then how do we make a decision because we don't know what's real about this relationship, and so we can't make a decision. I know I stayed in that state for over a year. It is painful. And here's the hard part about it. The awful part of it, the inability, the stuckness that you're feeling, it's like it actually has neurological implications. It's actually doing brain damage to you that you can't resolve it. It's like It's like you've put yourself, your mind is a computer system. You've put it into the state of, I have to know, I have to know, I have to know, and you can't make a decision. It starts to wear away at the hippocampus, which causes the hippocampus, which to shrink. That's why you're becoming more forgetful. That's why you're becoming more disorganized. It causes the amygdala to swell. That's your fight or flight system, your safety system. It actually starts to get bigger. That means that you now are having insomnia, that you feel a lot of excessive built up energy. You feel edgy, suspicious. All of this, it becomes, you become really caught in that. It is terrible. It actually causes brain damage. Now, the great news is it's reversible. When you get out and you get into a safer, calmer, quiet, peaceful environment, you start to do better, but you need to get out and take care of yourself. I created a home, and my husband splits our household and withdraws himself from the children, and I'm scared. Do narcissists even understand the pain they're causing themselves and other people? That's where we started with today. I know, Cam, you must have missed the first part, because what I'm saying is that they aren't wired up the way that we are. We can't assume that they view things the way that you would view things, or even care about the consequences the way that you would care about it. But what you have to do is look at the person's actions and decide if this is something that is helpful for all of you, or if this is going to be detrimental to the large picture. It sounds basically like this person is saying, I'm not going to be dad and I'm not going to be husband. And my solution is I'm going to live as a roommate here. Maybe I'm participating with some of the expenses, but essentially I'm not involved otherwise. So he's really saying, you're on your own. So for me, I would say the question is, how acceptable is that to you? Do you want to continue to live in an environment where you can't really be freely on your own and do things the way you would because this person's still in the house, but yet they're really not a part of, it's great for them. They've got everything they wanted, but wow, what a crappy situation for you and the children. Absolutely confusing. And do they care? You already answered your own question. They're doing it because it doesn't matter. That's why they're doing it. They're very predatory and they're very self-motivated. It works for them. It works for this person. It doesn't work for anybody else around them, but it works for them. And we shouldn't put up with it. I'm going to go ahead and give you my opinion. We shouldn't put up with it because we're then saying it's okay. And is this okay behavior? It's not okay in my world. I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody who is not interested in being in a relationship. Back to the ambiguous grief question, because I know more comments came up around that, is that how do you deal with that? How do you actually process the loss of something that never was? Danielle, I viewed it the same way that I view all grief. I viewed it like that person that I thought I was in a relationship with actually did die. Maybe not literally, they actually never existed, but for me, it felt as if they existed, and isn't that enough? I think that's enough for this to have been real to you, and now it's gone. That means there's grief. I think it's interesting how we judge ourselves. That, to me, is kind of the intriguing process of all of this, is that we kind of step back from these situations and feel like there's right ways of being and wrong ways of being, instead of asking ourselves, how do I support myself and show up for myself? Or I'm even thinking about this other situation on the where a person who's split the household but's not really involved. You're thinking about, is this really the way I want my children to see a family run? Is this in the best interest of me? What does it say about who I am? We tend to judge it as if we're outsiders and there's a right way and wrong way, when really it's not that. It's really whether or not it's healthy for you. Is it good for you? And grieving is part of a process of healing to move through the pain. It's not wrong to have, it's never wrong. Whatever grieves you, I don't even care if the TV show series disappears on you and it mattered to you and it was really played an important part of your life and it's hurtful to you, then that's important. That's grief. That's important. So I would say no judgment on having a reaction. And I grieved, when my relationship with my ex was over, I grieved for the person I thought I had met and never met. He doesn't exist, I know that. But I grieved that that person didn't exist, and I grieved the fact that I thought he existed and he's no longer part of my life. I certainly felt a lot of pain about that. So I think it's totally acceptable and that we should be more embracing, more curious. I love mindfulness in the sense of it urges us to approach things in a state of curiosity and, to question and create space for these things. That's how we create safety for ourselves, is that we create space for these things. So, do you think you've met someone with a Dark Triad personality disorder? I'd be curious to hear what that experience was like. How long did it take for you to recognize that you'd met someone dangerous? Drop me a comment on Instagram or email me. I'd love to hear about your experience. And be sure to get your ticket for the upcoming webinar with expert researcher Sandra L. Brown to learn more about how to protect yourself from these dangerous types of people. For more information, see the link in the show notes. And until next Monday, I'll see you then. Bye-bye.